The motion for this round reads, this House supports the creation and use of municipal bonds within developing countries in Africa. Without further ado, we welcome the Prime Minister to set the course for today's debate. Hear, hear.
Yeah, it's good. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, in today's debate, we have to be able to interrogate the current systems under which developing countries as much as possible to gain funds to be able to diversify growth in various areas, right? But then secondly, we also have to understand the nature of developing countries, how they are structured, and why we think it's a much better alternative for them to go into municipal bonds or for us to support municipal bonds other than like the alternatives that exist on the side of corporate. But then also, we have to get a clear idea of what exactly debt securities look like within the context of like municipal bonds, and why we think it's a better checking mechanism within African countries and within African states, and why we think we are better off going for these things, right? So first off, right, what do these things look like, or what does municipal bonds necessarily look like when we say, well, we are aligned, where we support these things, right? So it looks like individuals or groups like collecting money for the purpose of investing within certain groups, right? What this means is that the investments go specifically to the development or developmental projects that exist within these areas, right? So it means that private individuals can necessarily come up and say, well, I want to be able to invest in these areas, but these areas necessarily have to be able to give them the chance. That's why the municipal bonds creation comes in. So if these areas, if these municipalities, these districts say, well, we've created municipal bonds, you can be able to invest your money here, and then these monies go into like developmental projects within our communities, within our districts, right? That's what it necessarily looks like, right? But then what do debt securities look like, and why we think is very, very important in today's debate, right? Because first off, for debt securities, right, it looks at first off interest rates that are always dependent on the credit worthiness of the borrower, right? So it means that there's a higher incentive or checking mechanism for people to want to pay back their money, because as time goes on, if you do not pay your money, your credit worthiness is most likely going to go low, which means investors do not have an incentive to want to constantly invest within your state or municipality, right? But then secondly, looks at things like focusing on like debt securities, focus on things like financial assets, right? So looks at things like investing in infrastructure, investing in things like roads, buildings, those kinds of things that are most likely going to give returns to individuals, right? It means that these things most of the time are less volatile as opposed to equity, which means that people necessarily do not have the ability on the other which means that investors necessarily on the other side do not have the ability to be able to ensure that they are most likely going to get their funds back, right? But then the reason why award is very, very important and even brings a better incentive for people to want to come in to invest in your state is that the investors are always going to get the assurance that they are getting their principal back, right? There's no chance that they are losing their principal on our side, right? So there's a better incentive on them to want to come down and invest within your states, right? But what do African countries look like, and why we think these things are most likely important, right? So first off, on characterization of developing African countries and why these things are important. First off, these areas are ridden with corruption. Like they have very, very, very corrupt leaders that will most likely want to always centralize funds or distribution and control these things, right? It means that there's an incentive on them to always want to make things go in their favor, right? So think that these things are important, right? But then secondly, in like development and infrastructure and whatever are centralized in specific cities and specific states, which means that smaller municipalities do not have the ability to be able to sell themselves out, to be able to get like funds and to be able to develop, right? What this means is that within developing countries and within African states, right, aside from corruption, right, the problem is that you do not have like huge diversification of markets, huge diversification of development within various municipalities that exist. You don't give the chance for these guys because central governments most of the time will always want to send them, will always want to make sure that they control every single sort of funds. I think that those things are very, very important into this business. But then, panel, how do the creation of municipal bonds solve these things, and why we think we win on that, right? Because first, on the creation of municipal bonds, right, you give the ability for us to be able to decentralize how necessarily these smaller states or municipalities get or districts get funding to be able to increase developmental projects within their states, right? What does this look like? So first off, these states will be able to like create these things and sell themselves out to investors and say, well, you can come in because this is what we specialize in, right? So when you come in, there's a more likelihood that you are going to be able to get your returns, right? What this means is that these smaller municipalities, right, are now able to like sell themselves specific on what they are good in, right? The reason why this is better as opposed to upside is because central governments are most likely going to control how necessarily these guys get it, right? We think at that point, right, these guys are most likely going to get fewer funding and whatever. Why is this true? Because central governments have an incentive to always want to stay into power. So they do things like gerrymandering, gerrymandering or trying as much as possible to invest in areas where they know they are most likely going to get like votes or most likely want to keep their voting and voter base, right? So it means that a lot of smaller states that do not have that ability to call more votes are most likely going to suffer. We think that you give the chances for them to be able to benefit in that regard, right? But then, panel, we think that on accountability, we win on our side, right? But before I go on, shoot. Yeah, so they can be political appointees, right? But they equally have an incentive on their part to also want to make sure that their smaller states thrive. Because when their smaller states thrive, it's easier for them to constantly stay in power in those areas, right? We think that at best, right, on our side, we think that at worst, these guys will have an incentive on our side to want, or like all around, like smaller municipalities all around, we want to always build or invest in their areas, right? Which means that these areas are most likely going to develop and thrive, right? As opposed to your side where the central government that controls how much they get and what they use these things for, right? So it means that on your side, right, these guys are most likely going to be at the whims and caprices of the central government with no ability to be able to develop and thrive. We think that is terrible, right? But then on accountability and why we think we are able to check the corruption on our side because of the nature in which debt securities are structured, such that the interest rates are most likely going to go higher anytime you are unable to pay back like the reaping of investments early, right? What this means is that there's now an incentive embedded on individuals that say, well, we are selling ourselves out, right? So come in and invest, right? There's a burden on an incentive for them to either maintain the structures that they say, well, we are building and equally pay back these guys, right? Because when you don't pay back, your interest rates are constantly going to go higher, right? The reason why this is better, right, as opposed to your side is because with your side, these people literally have no incentive to want to pay back these loans on time, right? Because interest rates are most likely fixed on your side. We think on our side, we put that burden on them to always want to ensure that they do better. We think that our side is better, right? But then, panel, also understand this, that the current systems by which these developing African states, right, get funds to be able to develop and grow necessarily are ones that are necessarily failing them and ones that are necessarily not allowing them to be able to achieve the means that they want to achieve, right? Why is this true? Because on their side, right, the current things and current means are ones that allow for the corrupt government to constantly be corrupt because the checking mechanisms are literally lesser on their side, right? We think that our ward is one that allows for better checking mechanisms. Our ward is one that allows for smaller municipalities within bigger states to be able to diversify and grow. Never been this proud to propose.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for that introduction. We welcome the Leader of Opposition to introduce the case of in today's debate. Hear, hear.
My name is Victor. I'll take my POIs after my 5 minutes. So you can just indicate your hand and I'll take you when I'm ready. Okay, so I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panel, notice that this motion is very contextualized. We are talking about developing countries. Now, how does developing countries look like? These are countries which have less sophistication to be able to mobilize money, generate internal funds to finance their capital projects. That means that even at the state level, this sophistication to be able to have a wider net pool, to be able to get enough money to finance their project is very, very low. Now, this is the case where we are talking about decentralizing bonds to cities, counties, and even districts for them to be able to sell bonds to investors and all of that to be able to finance their capital project. We think that that's not going to be yield the impact that you want because, one, we are going to analyze you how the leadership of these countries and cities look like, and why we think there's less accountability at that level, and why we think these people are more likely to abuse this system as against the state, which relatively has a better accountability system to be able to check excesses of these political appointees. Now, how the cities and counties leadership look like? These are people who have been appointed by political people who have been elected into offices. These are people who finance the campaigns of these people, especially the presidents and ministers and all of those things. We think that for them to be able to appoint them to man districts and cities, they have that incentive to be able to get the returns in which they invested in these politicians in the first place. So we think that to the extent that the level of regulation at the district level is very low, it means that these people have all the incentive to be able to capitalize on this, to make more profit out of it. Now, how do we think that Prime Minister's failing about scores, the credit score to be able to acquire a loan is something that's even going to create more inequalities? Note that major cities like Nairobi and all of that relatively have better ways of generating funds to be able to service those bonds. But if you go to less diverse cities, how are they going to get these loans? That means that investors are more likely to give bigger cities loans, and smaller cities are not going to get. That means that you continuously make this inequality gap to widen. We think that that is very bad because in the event that the central government is in charge of this, where they'll be able to redistribute all this investment back into the country in a fairly equal manner, we think that brings the major utility as compared to what Prime Minister says. We think that, let's talk about how it is very, very important for states or the central government to be able to give bonds rather than decentralize this thing. We think that districts don't have the sophistication and political way to tax. Why is this true? We think that for them to be able to acquire this money to be able to repay their loans, it means that they are going to further have to rely on borrowing or what's it called? They are going to rely on borrowing and all of that to be able to finance their capital, to finance their this thing. Sorry. Okay, so yeah. So we think that the process is going to look like this. We think that for cities to be able to have fair lending, it's not going to be possible. Like I've already analyzed you, most of these cities do not have the huge market capital to be able to get money to be able to repay this debt. That means that investors are not incentivized to give these people money. That means that all those minor cities that do not really have that opportunity to be able to have a huge money to be able to attract these investors will not be able to, it will lose out. It leads to discriminating lending because investors do not want to lose their investment to debt restructuring and all of that. So that's why we say that comparing centralization of bonds to decentralization, especially in developing countries like Africa, where taxing is a very, very big issue, we think that it should be left for central government to regulate this, because at the central government level, we think that there are things like parliament and all of those things to check how these politicians operate. We think we also have the auditor generals and auditors to be able to check them. But notice that at the district level and all of those things, most of the appointees that are appointed to this checking mechanism are people that are all in bed with these politicians. We think that at the local level, that regulatory checking mechanism is not that robust enough to be able to check excesses that goes on within the local level. So we tell you that even if they are able to get these bonds, we think they are more incentivized to do things that inure to their own benefit as against the benefit of their vicinity, because all they want is to get their money back. Note how these people are very political, because the appointment of these people are largely on how they are able to help these people come into office. Before I continue, I'll take you.
Yeah. So the reason why they don't have the current resources is because they've been heavily limited by states or the central government. The world is in status quo. They are failing. How are you helping them?
Because the reason why states do not allow them to be able to do this is because of how I've already analyzed you, how these people are not able to get internally generated funds. Note that even at the central government level, getting people to pay taxes is extremely difficult. And these districts are even more, the problem at the district level is even more serious. That's why we tell you that for us to get a more equal opportunity in the society, government at the state level should be regulating how these bonds are given, so that these politicians will not have to capitalize on it because of the low checking mechanism that exists at the local level to abuse this system. We think at the central government level, we have better checking mechanisms that ensure that even if there are excesses, they'll be better checked as compared to the local communities and cities. Panel, the whole point, the whole clash in the first half is that let us give districts the opportunity to give out bonds, because then they don't have enough money to be able to finance their capital project. But we tell you that even in that case, these people do not have their capacity to be able to pay back because of the low tax returns that they get. That means that all those burdens are going to be pushed back to central government at the end of the day. All that is going to accumulate into the debt of the country, and it's going to be government will have to get money elsewhere to finance all those things. So we think there's a triple back effect to the states, and we think that for us to have an equal and fair system, the state will be able to regulate all this where money is redistributed equally. Proud to please.
Thank you, Mr. Leader of Opposition. Please, going forward, if you are using the debate keeper, please silence it. It's disturbing ours. So we have just one, and that's the one we're using. So if you are using the debate keeper, please keep it on silent so that we can keep with the time. All right, we now welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to extend the case of opening government into this debate. Hear, hear.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Brilliant. All right, so I'll take PRIs from both sides. Yeah, priority to both teams. After the 4th minute. Okay, let's start. Starting my speech in X, Y, Z. There are a couple of concessions Brain has already made in today's debate that outframes these guys, or even the closing. First of all, you need to understand the context of developing countries, right? But one thing is that these people need constant revenue flow to be able to help projects that they have. But the problem that limits their constant revenue flow or the things that help them in having developmental projects are one, their corrupt actions. But two, the mismanagement of funds that they constantly have within these places, right? But three, the burden on central government to be able to fairly distribute and monies in a decentralized form to every single municipality, which even have a lot of these places having gray areas, right? So the question then becomes, which is the better alternative, or which is the better option to ensure, one, the checking mechanisms to be immune to these corrupt actions and mismanagement of funds, but two, a way to constantly have streams of income to explore the gray areas that are existent within the multiple municipalities that central governments do not mostly have attention towards. We think that the creation of these bonds is one that helps because alternatives are unable to work. First context is on central government and why we don't think that the alternatives are capable of working. Because most of these guys are corrupt, right? Most of these central governments are corrupt. It means that they cannot be able to fairly distribute these funds, right? But two, assuming they are not even corrupt and they are better working, the reason why certain municipalities cannot get certain funds or they cannot be able to fairly distribute monies across every municipality is because they have an incentive of plowing back the little money or the little finances they are constrained with. So they are always targeting Nairobi, Lagos, Accra, the biggest cities where they can always have instant plowback of money from because there's constant trade and interaction within these places. It means that they give less regard to Kaswa or other sub-regions within those places. But we do not think that these other municipalities do not have certain field of specialization, because we think that things like agriculture, things like mining are also found within those lower cities and lower suburbs, right? But the reason why central government do not go there is because of one, the risk, but two, they're not being able to plow back these monies in that regard, right? It means that our system is one that gives more accountability and gives more accountability towards these corrupt actions. Why? Because what bonds look like is, in our context, is like there's a decentralized bond system for every municipality. That means that there are bonds available for every single municipality. It means that it's not central government giving out these bonds. That's why it takes these people out, because the thought is that, oh, central governments are not going to give these monies out to everybody because they cannot already cater for themselves. It looks like creating bonds for every single municipality where investors outside the country or within the country individually want to promise you certain amounts of money for the projects that you do. Why are these things better? Because one, investors will do mostly these things because they are more targeted on wanting to make back money. So what investors mostly do, they target gray areas. So gray areas that central governments do not want to take a risk of investing into, investors always take these things. What does it mean on impact? It means that all other municipalities have a decentralized attention, because all you need to do is to sell yourself as, I'm a good mining company. Even though the central government does not want to take a risk, investors will be ready to tap into those mining factors and sectors and give you the money to be able to make it better. But why does it check the corruption and mismanagement that these guys talk about? We don't think that developing states have incapable politicians. We think that they have politicians who are only thinking about themselves. That means that they need an incentive to portray their true characters of capability. What is the incentive? What brain tells you about? The more you delay in getting the infrastructure and the projects on, the more they're increasing in your in the profits you are supposed to pay back, right? It means that the interest is going to go higher. So that no politician would want to pay higher interest just because it's going to mismanage funds, because it's going to be on them. One. But two, there's an incentive for the investor to have a continuity of the project because of things like social and corporate social responsibility. So the investors themselves are a checking mechanisms to these corrupt politicians that they talk about. We don't think that they are incapable. We think that they need an incentive to continuously be better off. But three, there's a political will for these politicians to make sure that they look good towards these municipalities. So what they do is that they are the ones always trying to go out to sell out their municipalities, that we have available bonds you can come and invest into. So for the political will of wanting to be voted back into power, we think that they always want to look good in front of their electorates. They would always want to ensure that they efficiently have the projects done and they pay back these principals, and have the investors constantly investing, because when these investors invest into corporate social responsibility and build roads, it is the politicians who have the appraisal from the people for political will. We think that we check things like corruption and mismanagement, because we don't think that they're incapable. We think that they need an incentive. We are the ones that give them the incentive to be better off in that regard, right? But most importantly, as I've already told you, these municipalities have niches of areas of specialization, right? The reason why central government not really tap into these things is because of the risk I've already told you about. It means that investors have a more incentive to be better off, right? But why are alternatives far worse in that regard? Because we think that states within developing countries, central governments within developing countries already have huge debt they have to cover. So they don't have no incentive to visit IMF or to go to certain areas where they've already have their capital rating to be low. So it means that there's a less incentive to go externally to get more funds for themselves. So the best they have to do is to capitalize on the niches of specialization that these municipalities have that they can't be responsible for. But the reason why states will be better off in allowing these things to happen is because already they face huge backlashes from these many municipalities that exist, because they constantly say we do not have the attention from the state. In a world where you allow these bonds, the risk is not on the central government, the risk is on these investors. The reason why we think investors will be ready to take the risk is because they know that they are going to get their principal back. So once that is there, it means that that principal paying back is also an incentive for politicians and other controllers of the funds to always ensure that the funds are nicely appropriated. Why is that true? Because of the capital rating of they paying more interest if they don't invest into these things. So these people have to show how status quo is better off with the huge debt that they have. How the burdens that central governments have on them is still an incentive for them to appropriate funds to every other municipality. We think that in our world, we allow investors to come and take the risk, but we are a checking mechanism on the court and mismanagement acts of politicians to want to invest into these things appropriately and pay back, because they want to look good in the faces of their people and their political will. Proud proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. We welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition to wrap up the opening half of today's debate. Hear, hear.
Hello. Panel, I start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panel, the main reason why this debate has been contextualized, as Elo tells you, is because it occurs in developing countries. Why is this important in today's debate? It is important because these developing countries are countries that still need to get the basic amenities like schools, basic amenities like water, schools, basic, and all those things to be able to also industrialize to reach all those developed countries, right? What it means is that they have that incentive to be able to coagulate national money to be able to solve these problems. What you do when you sell bonds is that you better widen that inequality. How? We think that what OG says about its ability to diversify growth is not true. Why? Because we think certain municipalities may not have the necessary specialization as they preach about, like agriculture and mining, to be able to sell themselves to other people to invest in their municipalities. What it means is that people are much more likely to invest in bigger municipalities like Nairobi and Lagos, because they know that all these basic amenities like schools have already been built. So they do not have that incentive to invest your bonds in those things which will not generate the revenue back for you, the investor, to get. What in our world we preach is that government is able to get that revenue to make sure that they continue to build schools, to be able to undergo developmental projects that are critical to municipalities that do not really have anything to sell, right? It means that in their world, they rather streamline the growth because people are not incentivized to invest in rural areas because they do not have anything to sell. But then again, what do we tell you? We tell you that, right, these municipalities do not have huge streams of income. How do these things look like? It looks like these municipalities do not have the ability to be able to take things like taxes and things like social security and things to make sure that in case they default on the bonds, these are the alternatives we can use to pay our people back who have invested in us. Unlike us, where we have central governments have things like their banks, their central banks that can come and save them in case of debt and stressed economies. But in their world, where you have municipalities, you do not have any alternative. You don't have any streams of income to be able to pay back investors in case of default, right? But then they say, okay, then these people then become corrupt leaders, right? We say, because these people are also political appointees of these people from central government, they are also more likely to also be corrupt. And again, that mismanagement already also exists in their world, right? We think that is not exclusive. But then again, what are our main case in today's debate panel? We think that developing countries have a problem, right? The problem that exists is that they are not able to generate the necessary revenue to be able to match their spending, their expenditure. What it means is that they always have to borrow to be able to undergo developmental projects and all these things. What makes them in debt distress is that these developmental projects are so basic that they are not able to generate that revenue stream to be able to pay these particular people back. What it means is that when you invest in places where they are going to build schools and build all these things, you are likely not going to get your money back, right? But then again, the main problem with developing countries is that they are able to evade a lot of taxes. The reason is that they do not have that sophisticated system to be able to tax a whole lot of people, right? They do not have that tax expansion. But then at best, they continue to exempt people from their taxes, such as foreign companies who want to come and to incentivize these foreign companies to come and invest in their country. So they do not also get that. But then again, because of that, they want employment for their people. So they invite these people. What you don't want is that people investing in you and you also cutting your taxes, right? But then again, we tell you it's going to bridge things like inequalities. How do these things look like? We think that if investors invest in a particular municipality and they are not able to pay back, municipalities are forced to go to their local people, right, to be able to tax them more, to be able to pay back the debt. What it means is that people are going to leave these municipalities because they will not be able to pay all those taxes necessarily because they are poor, right? But then again, people are likely to emigrate from places where they are much more, their municipalities are much more likely to pay their investors because when they go there, they have that environment, right? We think that itself is not good. But then we say people are less likely to invest in developing municipalities because necessarily they do not have the people to be able to get the trade to pay these people. But then again, you also don't have the incentive to raise interest rates to attract people to come and invest in you because your ability to be able to pay back is limited. But then again, these municipalities entirely cannot engage in income generating activities like the central government, right? It means that they cannot be able to open things like banks and things for people to trade so that they get that profit to be able to pay these people back. What it means is that in our world, we have a government where they can invest our monies in better ways in which they can pay back our investors, right? It means that we have that incentive to continue to manage our things better. But then, again, in these developing municipalities, in a case where there is debt default, they are not able to have any way out. They do not engage that. They think they always get their way out. I'll take you.
Yeah, so the problem is that the world assumes that they are paying back in terms of money. But then the investors own the assets now. So that's literally their principle.
No, the main essence of buying bonds is to be able to make interest on your bonds. We think that itself cannot fly in today's debate, right? But then again, on accountability, we think that people are better incentivized when they are dealing with state governments, right? It means that even if any case we are dealing with the government of Ghana or the government of Nigeria, right? It means that there is that legitimacy that exists. But then again, when you go and invest at a much more lower level, when your money goes in debt distress, or when your money goes away, you do not have that ability to be able to go after these people because they really exist within the municipalities, right? It means you may have to go through central government before you enter into district municipalities and all that. We think accountability is better checked in our world because we have people that represent the country like the president and things who necessarily can be able to pay back in time. But then again, we stay in our world, right? We think we offer things like equality because we are better able to share the national cake, where we think people who necessarily don't have access to things are able to get it. But then in their world, people are incentivized to invest in big cities because those are where the interest rates are high. Lower cities have lower interest rates. I don't have any interest because they do not engage in any strong income generating fund. Never been proud to oppose today's debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. And that brings us to the end of the first half of today's debate. We now welcome the Member of Government to further extend the case of government in today's debate. Hear, hear.
Panel, we think that these municipal entities and cities need the money now. Why is that important? First, we think that largely these entities deal with things like healthcare systems, they deal with infrastructure, and deal with things like education, like schools, etc. What that means is that these entities are constantly facing challenges like environmental challenges like landslides, therefore there is like the urgent need to resettle these individuals, things like disease breakouts like cholera, etc. The option they have is two. They can wait for funding from foreign entities like IMF, or like they can wait for central government money, which is more likely to take long to arrive. What means is that the interim people within those particular cities and local communities are dying. What are we providing is a solution, money that is readily available because there is urgency to deal with these challenges. First, we accept that there is a trade-off that we need to make in this debate that we don't get in the opening half. How these municipal bonds work is that individuals are able to collect their money in a particular pool with the incentive to get interest. So the trade-off we are making in this world is that we are more likely to pay like more interest because these guys want to make profits which would not have if, for example, we relied on government, on central governments or foreign aid. But we shall also justify why that is particularly important. Panel, first, we tell you the idea of urgency, that in the interim, these people are dying. We do not have the luxury of waiting for the money to come like after a long period of time. But secondly, there is also a question that we need to deal with. How are we going to account for that particular interest, the extra interest that we have to pay for this immediate money that is already available because these guys want their profit back? First, we tell you that there are internal sources of revenue for these cities. That is to say, they can wait like for their budget allocation from the central government. Two, they can also internally have like local revenues. The reason why we tell you those sources exist is that those resources, like the alternatives that are provided by OO, are able to finance those particular loans in the long run. The challenge we are dealing with here is that we have an emergency that we need to deal with. But also secondly, there is like a huge clash in this debate about accountability. And like that's most nuanced thing you hear, the idea that these individuals are politicians and are going to eat this money. We think that on both sides, whether in central or local governments, you're likely to have corrupt officials. The question is, where do you get better accountability? What you get from our opening is a discussion that these are businessmen, right? Like these businessmen want their profits. But we are going to give you a unique rebuttal extension, which we think is important for that particular clash. One is that these communities are always having constant challenges or even emergencies, like cholera, like landslides that need to resettle these particular individuals in developing countries. What that means is that these individuals have an incentive at all times to always have money available to deal with them. What that means essentially is that they're going to be able to maximize how they use those particular funds because they need the pool to always be full. That is to say that when money from central government, which they want to give us, and the local revenues come, we are able to pay those money. The difference is that other entities like central government and other entities like IMF only give you money, one, because you agree with their values, or like it's some sort of aid, but also you do not have an obligation sort of like payback. We tell you in that kind of world, levels of accountability are low because these individuals know that that money can always come. But because you know that this money is what sustains your capacity to run these particular entities, you're more incentivized to pay like that kind of money. We think that that kind of analysis is very important. We think like issues of accountability exist on both sides, but we are able to like have less, like more incentive not to have those kinds of challenges. Secondly, we need to have an analysis on how like municipal entities work vis-a-vis central government. Is that most of these central governments and like how developing countries work do not have capacity, even if it is continued borrowing. That is to say, half of African countries, their debt to GDP ratio is really like so bad, like they don't have a lot of people who are willing to sort of like give them these free loans like from the West, and like the best they can do is give assets which you're not sure they're going to deal with. But also, like secondly, we think that these guys like plan according to financial year. Like this money is not readily available. The case we bring to you here is an issue of urgency. We think it is important to have that in perspective. So we think that largely you cannot wait for this money from these central governments. There are people in local municipalities or even external individuals who are willing to invest and get that particular profit. Secondly, we want to deal with a clash of lack of payment alternatives. What they say is that you are likely to invest in things like schools, like buildings, which don't bring like profits, right? We tell you the principle that like the real duty of these local communities or like cities is to provide like services to these people. We concede that indeed these individuals are not making profits; they're catering for their people who are in emergency circumstances. But we already tell you we have sources of money to pay that particular interest, which is like local revenue generation, which we agree that takes long, because if there is an emergency, you're not going to increase a tax like there and then to finance that emergency like they allege. But in the long run, because of the internal sourcing of these particular loans, we shall be able to pay them. Or like when the money they talk about in central government comes, we are going to be able to pay that money. That kind is very important. But why do we rank about our opening government? Opening government argues essentially two things. One, specialization. We think that in both sides, central governments are able to plan for all regions, right? Like for all local communities. The difference here is these individuals cannot wait for this money to come. Where we think we rank above them is that the impact of municipal bonds is more and is better because they're able to finance these emergencies as to when they reach. We think that kind of analysis is very important. But panel, if you don't take anything from this extension by CG, one thing you need to understand is that there is a trade-off in this debate that all teams must concede to. The question is, do we live like communities which are suffering because of emergencies, which are directly under the control of municipal governments to wait for central government finances or like external lenders when people are dying, or do we agree to sacrifice and pay for those interests, which will tell you that from our side of government, we are able to pay for in the long run, and we are able to pay these extra costs, but like after generating these internal resources and like the money they want to get from central government as a best alternative. We tell you from their word, in the interim, individuals don't have remedy because cholera is killing people, like people have just had landslides. Like these are the challenges developing countries face, and like, they need to be dealt with there and then. They do not have the luxury of waiting for central government finances which come after 2 months or even a month. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Member of Governments. We welcome the Member of UP to extend the case of opposition in today's debate. Hear, hear.
Okay, so I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2. Should I adjust it a bit? Is this better? Okay. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1.
Panel, it is important for us to understand what these developing states look like within our world, right? Panel, we tell you that these are states that are failing to sustain themselves, right? These are people who have average income where their average income is like $1. These are people who can't even buy themselves bread or meat ends meet, right? This is this is something that is very tough on them. Living for them is actually tough, right? And these are countries such as Zimbabwe and Malawi where we see this actually existing. And secondly, where do these specific people take these loans? These people take these loans from private entities, entities that are not within their countries, right? These are international banks, such as these are international states, such as first world banks, or private companies, private individuals, etc. These are entities that don't have the best interests of these specific individuals at heart, right? What are these interests that we are actually referring to as the closing opposition? This panel, when failure to pay this loan exists, one, we tell you that penalties occurs, right? These are penalties occurs when countries can't pay at that specific moment, right? So for an example that we can also use within today's debate as countries facing COVID-19. Countries, even if they still face COVID-19 at that specific moment, they still fail to pay these specific loans, and they're still subjected to interest rates more and more. These people don't care about these people, even within the situations and circumstances these specific countries are facing, right? And we tell you that these people are subjected to paying more of what they owe, right? And even if these entities care about these munis, panel, we tell you that these munis can't sustain paying their loans, right? Countries and munis are subjected to heavy penalties, right? So when it leads to them increasing, so this actually leads to them increasing needs such as tariffs, taxes, living standards. What are these living standards we're actually referring to? Electricity, transport, food, sanitation, all these necessities that these specific countries depend on for a living, right? And it becomes very problematic for these normal individuals to compete with these specific increases that exist within that specific moment, right? And at a point where they fail, it means these specific countries now owe double the amount that they used to owe. They owe more than what they actually owe. All right, but even if panel, we tell you as CEO that even if this investment does good, like it goes good, right? These private entities will influence policies passed in the country to maximize their own personal and private interests, right? And now we as these specific countries open ourselves to situations such as exploitation, like situations such as losing our local economy that we're already seeing exist, right? And it's very important to note within today's debate, the mechanization that these specific entities use is very problematic within today's debate. Why? These specific mechanizations that these entities use harm people that are on the ground floor, right? And we tell you how this is not sustainable for these specific developing countries, right? And secondly, what does this create, right? First, I'm going to give you a 3-layer of analysis on how this actually materializes and why is it important and why is it true. Panel, firstly, we tell you about the debt burden on us as Zimbabwe or us as Malawi, right? Panel, we tell you that secondly, we are subjected to interest rates on an international or a global rate or scale, right? And we tell you this is where countries such as Malawi are rated where they have very low developing, where they are actually low developing countries are still rated and taxed and still have interest that is the same as countries like South Africa, countries that are actually much better in that instance. So even if they are not developed at that specific moment, they are still, like the others, they are still being compared to countries that are developed, right? Which is also very problematic within today's debate. And thirdly, what does this do? Corruption rate increasing. Panel, we tell you that even if governments will get these investments, right, we question the corruption rate that will exist within this mechanization, right? We tell you how this leads to lack of accountability. Panel, because these specific people aren't transparent in how much they get. They aren't transparent on how much they use. They aren't transparent on how much they actually owe, right? Which is something we also find very problematic within today's debate. So we believe that the lack of transparency leads to problematic situations like such as Zimbabwe, where they had little to no development, but they had big loans to pay, and this we've seen existing, right? And how this actually still leads to dictatorships taking place and existing within these specific communities, right? Counterfactual that we, as the closing closing opposition bring within today's House. One, we encourage discourse and strikes within small municipalities, right? Panel, we tell you how we will see a lot of people opting in because they see no development, right? This is why they will want to opt in and encourage discourse and strikes within these specific municipalities we are referring to, right? Panel, secondly, we tell you how we will be creating metro municipalities, right? We're going to prove to you how this counterfactual works within our side, right? Panel, we also tell you how we actually are allowing these small municipalities and these large municipalities to actually work together, right? In terms of economic development, right? In terms of infrastructure, right? And we also tell you how these small developing countries will actually have access to bigger budgets of these big developed countries when they actually work together as one thing, right? And thirdly, most importantly, they will be creating bonds within countries where the US will allow like free trades in terms of like imports and exports, right? Panel, we tell you that supporting free trade zones within these countries is something that we need to actually cater for. Panel, why is our side important and why is our case important? Panel, we tell you how economies can grow and how they can actually sustain themselves within our side of the House, right? And what is our aim as the closing opposition? Panel, we tell you how we want to protect individuals within society, right? And we tell you how we don't want people to being subjected to paying high taxes and interest rates that we see inside government's mechanization actually materializing, right? So this is why we also think we are mutually exclusive and we deserve to win this debate. Yeah.
Thank you, Member of Opposition. We now welcome the Whip of Government to wrap up the case for the government bench into this debate.
Panel, the reason CO loses this debate, it's because every harm they think they say is exclusive to our side, but it's rather not. One, they tell you that at a point in time that they have an alternative or the country is borrowing on behalf of the municipals. One is that you do not have neocolonialism sort of existing, but you do not have those values existing. But I want to tell you, one, the IMF or the World Bank do not care whether you're transparent or accountable. What they care about is whether you take in their Western values or whether you're going to get their values and take them in as compared to private entities. On the other comparative, what do private entities care about? They care about profit maximization as compared to influencing policies and decisions. At the end of it all, what they care are the returns of what they're going to get out of that. But secondly, they come and tell you that we think that we're going to have discourse and strikes and we're going to have a free market. We think that these are things that are existing in status quo. But secondly, you cannot trade what you do not have. And that's why I'm going to show you that these municipalities and districts sort of influence what the central government looks like, right? We think that what the central government does is to rely on the taxes and the local revenue that is collected from these municipals. But at a point in time that local revenue and all that is not existing, then these governments do not have anything to sustain themselves, even in making financial budgets, but also in running the sustainability in the country. But the third reason, they come and tell you that the issues of accountability, it's easier to hold a whole government accountable than the other way around, right? We think that it's easier to hold local leaders because you elect them into power. They want social capital or they want buy-in for the next election. So it's easier to hold them accountable as compared to NGOs which do not have any incentive or which you cannot hold accountable in the long run. So we think that because of that buy-in or because of that social capital that they want, because they want to be re-elected, because of their selfish motives and everything, they are more incentivized to be accountable to their citizens as compared to NGOs, right? But then moving on to OO. OO comes and tells you that we think that the central government is going to create checks and balances and inequality is going to exist. But I'm going to show you why inequality exists more on their side as compared to our side, right? One is that at a point in time that these governments are more concentrated or they're prioritizing maybe like cities as compared to municipals and districts. One is that you're going to continuously create poverty because these people in these municipalities or districts have inherited like structural barriers to resources. They do not have like resources to exist in terms of infrastructures, but also in terms of like health health systems, education systems, which rather elevate like the inequalities that exist. So at a point in time that we're considering the centralization that they talk about, there is no way to hold them accountable. But in the best case scenario, notice that what happens in their world, the country is going to continuously borrow because we think that developing countries continuously rely on foreign donations, continuously rely on aid. But now here the question comes, the necessity and the question of urgency. At a point in time that the money is coming in within like more 5 years, we think that these municipalities and districts cannot wait on these capital projects to get to develop or what they want to solve at that time. Like we show you they have problems of diseases, we show you they have problems of like infrastructure or the education system becoming bad, right? So we think that in the world the alternative is that we wait on the central government to come in and provide for these solutions. Why is that problematic? We think at the end of it all, these countries also are going to rely on debt, or they're going to rely on this money that is going to come from somewhere else like the IMF. But why is that? We tell you that the values that they want, they do not want to get accountability or transparency. But secondly, for municipal bonds to exist, we think that these municipalities or districts must provide an incentive for them to come. And that's why we tell you that they're more incentivized to maybe build trust and maybe build transparency because they want this money to come in, because it's either a do or die in their world, right, as compared to what the central government does exist. But secondly, we think that they come and tell you that, you see, on this whole thing, we think that we are going to make more profit or what. We tell you in our world, interest rates are going to exist. But in a world where we cater for those interest rates, because municipalities are sort of catered for in every financial year or in the national budget that does exist. But again, they have local revenues that exist in that particular paradigm, right? At the point in time that they have that, they're sort of able to cater for these loans, but they're also able to cater for the interest rates that are going to be created in that world, right? But then we tell you that at a point in time that all these capital projects are delayed in these countries, one is why you're going to have underdevelopment continuing. Because the country for itself to sustain itself, it must rely on the local revenue that comes from these municipalities. But at a point in time that that local revenue is not there, then we think that also these countries are going to be highly indebted. And what CEO is talking about, like influencing of policies, will continue because they'll continue borrowing from agencies like the World Bank or the IMF to continuously sustain themselves. Right. So what do we tell you from side CG? From side CG, we show you that politicians in municipalities have more incentive to make sure that these projects work out. Why? Because of the buy-in that they want at the end of it all, but secondly, because of the political will that does exist among these politicians, right? But thirdly, we think that at a point in time that they want development for their people, or they want, because it's easier to hold them accountable, they're incentivized to become more transparent and become more trustworthy. And that's why they attract more municipal bonds, because they're more transparent and even the interest rates. But we cater for you. The question from OO and CO is that these people do not have that sort of money to pay for this. We tell you at the end of it all, there is local revenue that is collected from these municipalities, but secondly, the national budget caters for that. I'll take you OO.
So we tell you that investing in things like hospitals and schools cannot pay back bonds. Show us why municipalities will not end up in debt distress.
Pano, you notice that that is like inheriting structural barriers to resources. At a point in time that you do not have any knowledge about how to begin a business, then you cannot start a business. At a point in time that you do not have health systems that cater for your health and the productivity that exists in society, you cannot begin a business. So we think that capital projects like infrastructure, where you're going to build like highways and collect like taxes, is what caters for the sustainability of this. So we think that there's strange reasoning of like infrastructure or anything like capital projects do not cater for this, does not stand right. But secondly, we tell you, on the side of the state, what is the necessity? The necessity here is because these municipalities are dying in dire conditions where they're underdeveloped, but they're susceptible to things like diseases, but secondly, they do not have any form of redress existing and inequalities are increasing. We tell you that what the state at the end of it all also wants is to make sure that the citizens are either living high standards, to make sure that the GDP is more increased because these citizens have the capacity to sustain themselves. We tell you that the bare minimum any government can provide for its citizens is the capacity to make sure they're innovative. We think that why countries like China or the US are developed, it's because they are decentralized. They have enabled their citizens to tap into the fourth industrial revolution. For any country to develop, then the citizens must be developed right from the grassroots. When you do not have that existing, you do not have that form of innovation, but secondly, you're not able to tap into the fourth industrial revolution. So why do we think that this is important? Why do we think we rank above the other teams? What? We tell you the issue of urgency and the issue of capacity to make sure that you do away with local economies and to make sure that you reduce the corruption rates. We show you corruption rates are reduced in our side because political leaders are more willing to be transparent because of the social buy-in they want at every time of election. But thirdly, we tell that the alternative that exists in the other world is to continuously rely on a government that is continuously borrowing, never being proud to propose.
Thank you, Whip of Governments, for wrapping up government's case. We now welcome the Whip of Up to wrap up the debate in its entirety.
Before I start, please time if you want to ask a QI. I'll only accept them like after 3 minutes. Yeah, 3 minutes. Okay. So I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, note something that is quite important from starting closing opposition, right? We talk about the ramifications that will happen to individuals on the ground. Everyday individuals who are living their lives. How will they be impacted by supporting something like this if their local municipality takes that drastic measures? What Alex tells you is quite important. Alex tells you, for these local states, for these municipalities to actually be like, you know, we're going to pay back these individuals, it means that they'll be subjected to increasing certain things such as the tariffs within that specific place, increasing the things such as like the standard of living within that specific place. And that is this problem that we have. Individuals will be subjected to high prices when they can't even self-actualize within their local economy, that they are saying that they won't even plow money into that local economy, right, panel? Panel, something that open government does. Open government says that we will take the money and actually put it in mines and in farming, agriculture, and all these things, right, panel? But note, at a point where you take something quite so strategic, such as like the mining sector and the agriculture sector, and you give it to private entities, it means that they want to maximize their productivity and their interest in that specific case. Whereas you could have actually thought about keeping within this country with people that have the interest that are actually like best like that actually want to like maximize their own country's interest, not individuals who are private who do not care about that specific country. So if you could have gotten the whole cake, you will only get a specific small piece of the cake that is not significant. So you don't maximize the productivity that you could have got from the specific sector that exists within your world, within your land. So from the mine that could have been giving you 10 billion rand, you're only going to get 1 million rand, and they think that no, that is productivity within our state, and we are more than happy to get that 1 million rand. But then there's a multi-billion company, there's a multi-billion opportunity and investment that they actually left. Parents, something on urgency that they speak about. We tell you that we can still achieve urgency on our side of the house when we talk about the creation of metro municipalities. Metro municipalities, it means that the centralized governments that they talk about, which are quite problematic, we can pair them up with the smaller municipalities also to be like work together to see them support these smaller municipalities to have this decentralization of power thing. So the point where you take a municipality that's actually struggling and you put them together with a municipality that is actually big and that is actually has the money and is given them more capital, it means that you can encourage them to work together to actually like have more incentive, like because they have the same values and same incentives and the same economy. Either way, they can work together to make the economy much better and develop as a whole. Panel, what they actually talk about is the interest of these specific politicians. They believe that the politicians will have incentive because they want social capital. But we tell you in countries such as Africa, where mechanizations of holding these people accountable do not exist because there are no bodies that are like partial to hold these people accountable. These people will have no incentive whatsoever to look after these individuals or to be like true to themselves or use the money for the purposes that they have to, but they will use that specific money for their own gains because they are selfish. They want to be in the realm of power, not because they want to have the power, but because they can tap into the money at any point whatsoever so that they can chow the money and be like, yeah, I make maximized profit in that specific case. Let me take open.
Yeah, so aside the fact that the trickle-down economics on your side doesn't work, we think that the social reality is that these areas are suffering. We think that a world where they get marginal utility is better than a world where they get...
But what we are saying is that we can still sort that thing out with other local municipalities within that specific country. They concede to the fact that there is money that is given to specific municipalities that are strategic. We are saying that the centralized government should create more metro municipalities by taking the bigger municipalities and pairing them with smaller municipalities so they can get access to the money that they cry about now to solve the situation now. At a point where NAIROBI, Kenya, has a bigger economy and has a bigger fund and can actually support a struggling economy such as Limpopo in the north of Kenya, it means that these individuals are more likely to, it means that these specific municipalities are more likely to bounce ideas off each other, are more likely to help each other in monetary ways, and because they are from the same country and share the same interest and want to actually see their people develop, they are more than happy to actually have this happen, to actually make this happen. Paolo, they say, let me take this.
When you bring these all entities together, you just have one big block of poor people.
Panel, what we say, why the mechanization is quite important now, counterfactual, right, panel? We will pair them based on seeing the potential that they have if they are together. If we know that the economy like the NAIROBI economy can actually best work with a specific economy because they are both into agriculture, we'll pair those two municipalities together to sort out the decentralization of power thing. But panel, something that is quite important that we talk about as a closing opposition is you open yourself to these individuals, exploiting you. At the point where I come with a lot of money and I put it in your economy, it means that I can actually bring a check and be like, no, because I'm giving you this much of money, it means I need some sort of policies to change so that I can thrive in this specific economy. So every policy that is being passed, it is not passed for the benefit of the individuals within that society, but it is passed to have these countries be at a point where they can actually maximize their profit. So exploitation is something that can actually happen in this specific world. Let me take you.
Yes, like even in that world of that exploitation, we think that the quality of life within these areas improving is much more better than a world where they constantly suffer.
We concede to the fact that we need to do something now, but we mean at a point where we concede to them and actually support something like that, right, panel, we open ourselves up to more dire situations. At a point where we fail to actually pay this loan, what actually happens? At a point where what actually happens, it means that we owe them twice the amount of money because of the penalties that exist. We owe them twice the amount of money that we owe them in the first place because these individuals feel that, because these individuals don't give an F. So in a case where we have like the COVID-19 pandemics and economies are struggling, the economies are struggling, the mines are closed, we can't use all these things that these people invested in. These private entities won't be like, no, we understand it's COVID, we won't actually expect the money now. But these specific entities will be like, you need to pay us. We don't care about the situation that is happening. At a point where there's something like an economic downfall within that society, they won't care. They still want their monetary value, they still want to maximize the profit. So at a point where you give them all this power, you are opening yourself up to more exploitation by these specific countries. What does this do? This opens yourself up to losing your local economy. At a point where these individuals, they see that you can't pay them, it means you lose your mines. It means you lose your agriculture sector. It means you get no monetary value from them in the long run whatsoever because it now belongs to these private entities fully. So even if you'll be getting import and export taxes, which is the minimum that you'll get because now you lose them, you just get like 5% or 2% of the state, right, panel? Panel, we say that is quite problematic and it is quite detrimental. They are talking about the only reason why they want to support something like this is because power is centralized to certain municipalities only within today's society. But we say we can still solve that specific issue. The urgency that we give you from side closing opposition is creating a counterfactual that can work. Pair municipalities based on their specific strengths and what they can offer. If you know that Nairobi has the money and a specific state and a specific municipality has the resources, pair them together because they concede that there's potential in the specific small municipalities. When you pair these specific municipalities together, it means we can maximize utility for both municipalities and the larger country at state. I'm so proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you all speakers very much. Panel will go and deliberate, and the qualifying teams will be announced at the breaks. Thank you very much.